The concept of defunding the police has to be the most ignorant statement and or policy to be introduced in American history. Let's get this clear. People do not want to just defund the police. They want to abolish the police. You can look at it in Minneapolis and other cities where they want to completely remove the police department from their cities, leaving their citizens susceptible to high crimes, violence, and no support on the state level to protect them. So I think that people need to understand, what does it mean to defund the police? It means to eradicate a force in a department that's protecting citizens from rape, from abuse, from potential crimes, robbery, homicides, and all of the above. So I do not support any legislation, any bill that's being put forward to defund the police department. I think it's ignorant. I think it's irresponsible, and we need to do better.
When people say defund the police, certainly there's a radical fringe segment that wants to abolish the police and get rid of law enforcement. But there's a much larger contingent of people who, when they say that, see an opportunity to talk about much needed reforms that can be made. I fall into the latter camp. I'm not talking about abolishing the police. As a matter of fact, I'm not even talking about reducing salaries. What I'm talking about is making some major reforms, some of which by nature will involve some level of defunding. First and foremost, we should not be giving federal funds to agencies that violate civil rights. Secondly, we should end the 1033 program and get weapons of war off of America's streets. Third, we should end the war on drugs, which has been an abject failure. Fourth, police should not be the main responders for mental health crises. That should be mental health professionals. And lastly, we should get rid of the practice of civil asset forfeiture, where police can essentially take people's assets without convicting them of a crime. These aren't radical proposals. A lot of these have bipartisan support.
Hello, I'm David Grasso, and you're watching Bold TV. Today's burning question: should we defund the police? Let's hear from our panelists. First, we have Brandon Tatum. He's an ex-police officer and co-founder of #Blexit. And joining him is Dan King, a senior contributor to Young Voices and Civil Liberties Activists. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so there's been a call by activists to defund police departments around the country. Do you agree, Brandon? Let's start with you.
No, I do not agree with defunding the police department. I think it's a misnomer or a false statement for individuals to say, no, we just want to take and divert money. That's not true. Most people are trying to eliminate the police department. You can see this in Minneapolis and other major metropolitan cities that have made a commitment to just completely obliterate the police department. That's not going to happen. Most people who say they want to defund the police department cannot articulate any one area that would be beneficial to reducing or even cutting funds to a police department that essentially, in my personal opinion, needs more training, needs more funding and support. So I do not support any avenue or conversation about defunding the police department.
Okay, Dan, let's hear from you. What do you have to say about this?
Brandon's got a point that some folks certainly go too far with it. I would never call for abolishing the police. I would never call for getting rid of law enforcement. But what I would call for is rethinking how we allocate resources. For example, we spend $30 billion a year fighting the war on drugs. We spend $9 million a day incarcerating people for drug offenses. Now imagine if we took those resources and instead of investing them in incarcerating people where they can't get the treatment they need, we invested that money in mental health services, we invested that money in addiction treatment, we invested that money in education, communities, and businesses. We would live in a safer community, people would get the treatment they need, and law enforcement's resources and time would be freed up to go after the murders, the rapes, the assaults, and the robberies that go unsolved each and every day.
Yeah, Brandon, would you agree with that? You know, something like the war on drugs is a waste of money, and maybe we can move on from that?
No, it sounds good. It sounds good as a talking point, but it's not really applicable. As a former police officer, you talk about the war on drugs. You're talking about individuals who are using drugs, abusing drugs, and then they're leading down the path of criminal activity. The people who are robbing individuals, people who are murdering individuals, people who are raping individuals also have a problem with abusing drugs. A normal, sane individual do not commit crimes to the level that we see in some of our communities. People who abuse drugs do. Now, I want to make this quick point. As a former police officer, we used to take people to jail and they get treatment. They have treatment programs. They can be put on probation where they have to adhere to certain I guess drug tests and things to make sure that they're not abusing drugs continually. Those things are already in place. I don't understand why we feel like we can't hold people accountable for breaking the law and then also get them treatment on the back end as well.
So, Dan, one of the things that I keep on hearing, is the abuse of police unions, right? That there's no accountability, that, cops really don't respond to criticism or reporting or, there's a big problem with accountability, as I said. What do you have to say about that?
So I think accountability is a concern, and I think it should be a concern for good cops, because there are plenty of good cops out there who want to serve their community. They want to make their community safer, and a lot of them are doing that. Something I would look at is qualified immunity. An officer who violates somebody's civil rights should be held accountable in civil court. They should not be exempt from this. And police unions do a disservice to good cops when they stand by bad cops.
Yeah, Brandon, I have a question too. I'm old enough to remember the 90s when crime was a serious issue in most of our nation's cities. Do you feel like this pattern of defunding the police will cause a rise in crime in places like New York, Detroit, Los Angeles, etc.?
Yeah, we've already seen it. I think Baltimore and some of these other places are up 200, 300% in murders. Especially in Chicago, Illinois, you have, I don't know, they're up over 200 murders this year, and they're 200% higher than they were last year. And so it is asinine to think that you can defund the police and not get results that you see. The rhetoric against police, the hatred against police, the rioting and protesting the police officers, and then you see the crime go up. You could just put two and two together. Can I touch on the unions real quick? Because I don't know if Dan has ever been a part of a police union, but I was a part of a police union, and it wasn't that our union was sticking up for bad police officers. The union cannot protect you if you commit a crime. You're going to go to jail. They cannot protect you from getting fired unless the department has violated your rights as a police officer. Our union stood up for more than just police officers' bad behavior. You stand up and make sure that you get the fair treatment like a defense attorney would. And then also they make sure that we get paid. They make sure that the police department and city council isn't doing something that's against police officers that can cause us to not get our retirement and different things like that. So the police union that I was a part of actually helped the police, did fundraisers in the area, did community outreach. So it's not just police brutality and police protection that goes on with the union. It's a lot more involved.
So I'm going to give you the last word, Dan. What do you have to say about this thing that, if we do defund the police, we can't keep Americans safe? Do you think that's a false equivalency, or do you think Brandon has a point?
I think it depends on how far you go with defunding. Certainly abolishing the police is not the right trajectory to go. But if you're responsible about it, you look at Camden, New Jersey, they had the highest violent crime rate in the country in 2012. They essentially dismantled and rebuilt their police department to be more focused on community outreach and working within the communities. The police chief said he wanted his officers to be seen as guardians instead of warriors. And the crime rates have plummeted in Camden, and it's just led to safer communities, more trust with the police, and better outcomes overall.
I disagree with that because you have to look at it like this. The police aren't the arbiters of crime. The police are responding to crime. So the community has an obligation to do better and to rethink what they're doing in conjunction with the police. So just changing the police is not going to bring down the crime. We also know about crime reporting. If you don't want crime to go up in the community, you don't want the visibility of crime, you report crime and reclassify crime, and it makes it look like the crime is going down. I do think police can improve in this country. I want to see us have a fair conversation for the community and policing, and we can make this country better.
Well, thank you both for being here today and having a respectful conversation around this topic. We look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.